Hi and welcome. So in this video we kick off chapter 18 of our Macroeconomics 3 module, where we discuss the openness of the economy. So the implications of the openness in the goods market and the financial market will be discussed in detail in this chapter. So the openness in the goods market allows people to choose between domestic goods and foreign goods, while the openness in the financial market allows people to choose between domestic assets and foreign assets. So we've already discussed the different types of domestic goods and foreign goods that are available. We've also discussed the different types of financial assets that are available to us, as well as other countries that we trade with. So we have assumed until now that the economy we looked at was closed, suggesting that it did not interact with the rest of the world. So we had to start this way to keep things simple and to build up to intuition of the basic macroeconomic mechanism. So this figure here shows how bad, in fact, this assumption of closed economy has been. The figure plots the growth rate for advanced and emerging economies since 2005 up until 2012. So what is striking is how the growth rate has moved together over time. So despite the fact that the crisis originated in the USA during the financial crisis in 2009, the outcome was a worldwide recession. So with a negative growth both in advanced and emerging economies. As you can see, the advanced economies represented by blue and emerging economies represented by black. And the one in the middle represents the average of both, which is the entire world. So when the financial crisis occurred, it was a recession in the entire trend of both emerging economies as well as advanced economies, even though it began in an advanced economy. So looking at this picture, it is basically evident that it is time to relax this assumption. So we now look at the macroeconomic implications of openness. So openness has three distinct dimensions. So the first is the openness in the goods market. So this is the ability of consumers and firms to choose between domestic goods and foreign goods. So in no country is this choice completely free of restrictions. This suggests that even the countries most committed to free trade have tariffs and quotas on at least some of foreign goods that are traded into their economies. So at the same time, the most countries' average tariffs are low and getting lower over time. The second openness is the openness in the financial market. This is the ability of financial investors to choose between domestic assets and foreign assets. So until recently, even some of the richest countries in the world, such as France and Italy, had capital controls, which are basically restrictions on the foreign assets their domestic residents could hold, and the domestic assets foreigners could hold in their country. So these restrictions have largely disappeared. So as a result, the world financial markets are becoming more and more closely integrated. The third openness is the openness in the factor market. So this entails the ability of firms to choose where to locate production and workers to choose where to work. So with regards to the openness in the factor market, the trends are much clearer. So multinational companies operate plants in many countries and move their operations around the world to take advantage of low cost. We've also seen a lot of foreign workers migrating into countries like South Africa to look for greener pastures in their working industry. However, in the short run and medium run, openness in the factor market plays much less of a role than openness in the goods market and the financial market. Therefore, we shall ignore the openness in the factor market and focus on the implication of the first two dimensions of openness. So we're not going to look at the openness in the factor market. So the openness in the goods market means that domestic residents are able to buy foreign goods and sell domestic goods abroad. So these transactions are, however, guided by some restrictions, such as tariffs and quotas. So goods sold to foreigners are called exports, while goods bought from foreigners are called imports. So the difference between export and import is known as the trade balance. So a negative trade balance is called a trade deficit, suggesting that imports are greater than exports. And a positive one is a trade surplus, meaning that exports are greater than imports. So this would suggest that since the positive one is when the exports are greater, a country looks to export more than it imports as much as possible. So this figure here helps us look at how much South Africa sells to and buys from the rest of the world. So it basically plots the evolution of South African exports and imports as the ratio to GDP since the 1960. So we can draw two main conclusions from this figure. The first one is that exports and imports, which were equals to 20% of the GDP in the early 1990s, had improved to around 29% of the GDP by the end of the time trend. This is shown by the positive gradient here. If you look very well from the early 1990s up to around 2012. So it has basically increased over time. The second conclusion is that although imports and exports have followed the same upward trends over time, since 2004, imports have considerably exceeded the exports. So, in other words, for the last 9 years in this time trend, South Africa has consistently ran a trade deficit, suggesting that imports were greater than exports. As you can see, the import line, which is black, lies mostly above the one of the export line, which is blue, meaning that the imports are basically greater than exports, and we have been running a trade deficit. So, understanding the source and implications of trade deficit is central to macroeconomics today. Hence, the need to have a focus on it. Also, given this and all the talks in the media about globalization, a volume of trade around 29% of GDP might strike you as small. However, the volume of trade is not necessarily a good measure of openness. Many firms are exposed to foreign competition, but by being competitive and keeping their prices low enough, the firms are able to retain their domestic market share and limit imports. So this suggests that a better index of openness that tells us a better story than export or import ratios is the proportion of aggregate output composed of tradable goods, which are the goods that compete with foreign goods in either domestic markets or foreign markets. So with an export ratio around 28% of GDP, it is true that South Africa's ratio is in line with the average ratio of export to GDP among the richest countries in the world. So table 18.1 here gives the ratios of a number of OECD countries. And we can see that the United States and Japan are at the low end of the range of export ratios with 14 and 15% respectively. The United Kingdom's ratio is about the same as South Africa there, but Germany is almost twice as large. So the smaller European countries have very large ratios from the larger countries. So 52% in Switzerland and 86% in Belgium, as you can see. So an important question to ask here is that do these numbers indicate that a country like the United States has more trade barriers than, for instance, South Africa or Belgium, given that it has the lower trade ratio than them, or export ratio than them? And the answer to this will be this is not the case, or rather no. So the main factors behind these differences are geographical aspects as well as sizes. So the distance from either market explains a part of the lower Japanese ratio. So size in this regard also matters. So the smaller the country, the more it must specialize in producing and exporting only a few products and rely on imports for the other products they consume. So Belgium can hardly afford to produce the range of goods produced by the United States, for instance, especially since the United States is a country roughly 40 times the size of the economic size of Belgium. Okay, so how does the openness in the goods market force us to rethink the way we looked at equilibrium in the goods market? So since until now, we've only assumed a closed economy. This suggests that under the closed economy, domestic residents made only one decision, and that is how much to spend, or rather how much of their income to spend. While under the narrative of an open economy, domestic residents make two decisions rather than one. So they make the same one they made earlier, which is how much to spend. But the new second decision they make is how much to spend on domestic as opposed to foreign goods. So indeed, all buyers, including domestic and foreign firms and governments, face the same decision. So this decision has a direct effect on the domestic output. So if buyers decide to buy more domestic goods, and demand for domestic goods increases, and so does domestic output. So if they decide to buy more foreign goods, the foreign output increases instead of the domestic output. So central to this second decision is the price of the domestic goods relative to foreign goods. So we call this relative price the real exchange rate. So one thing to note is that the real exchange rate is not directly observable, and you will not find it in any newspaper. So what you will find in newspapers are nominal exchange rate, the relative price of currencies. So how much of one currency can you spend to acquire another currency? So we start by looking at the nominal exchange rate, and then see how we can use the nominal exchange rate to construct the real exchange rate. And we'll do this in the next video. Thank you.